me as like, if it's there, it's there. Like, who has to decide? Anyway, but Gesenius. So I looked up the word Zachar. I found Gesenius very interesting can I shift into Zachar?
Yeah.
First of all, the Zion, he talks about how the resemblance of the letter, the letter to the original shape. But even when it comes to Zachar, the male, he says, to derive from the shape, which is interesting. Whereas the member, so he says Zachar is similar to Dakar, which I thought interesting, to stab. I found this very fascinating. And then he says, I mean, this is a theory, but he says that the idea of memory, zikaron, is that it stabs you, that it penetrates you. But I mean, literally, he says this. The idea of memory then may come from that of penetrating, infixing. But then, but I find the word Dakar. I mean, so I kind of look at the tongue, and I mean, I don't mean to be offended, but like I feel like there's an English word too, like it sounds like Dakar, duck, dick. Like I don't mean to be offensive, but I feel like it's the same idea. Like the tongue kind of protrudes. You know what I'm saying? And I noticed that the word tail, because a Zion is really like the Zion is really initially a tet. I mean, it's a tongue. It's a tongue like it's a
Right.
lingual dental. Like a dental. So basically, a Zion is really a tough. In a sense, it's a softened. So like I wrote down Zion in Hebrew and tail in English, and you have the nun, like if you just write them down, tail and Zion, they really look alike visually the same. But I read a long time ago on the internet, like this was an idea, but that there's a correspondence between the shape of letters and the position of the tongue. So in a way that kind of pulls it all together. So Zion, I mean, you're talking about the two letters that are dental, right? And then tail, dental, and there's a certain unity. Um, So beyond that, there's a lot of words in English, especially nail, tall. Think of tall and tail, and needle. There's a lot in English, and like for me,
And
there's
tall looks tall.
uh-huh. And I feel like it all goes back to the essence to the tongue. That the tongue itself is a gesturing device, like kind of take it.
Yeah.
Like I call it I have a general hypothesis in a sense, like the lips are lips, like vagina, betula. I don't know if it's true, but it's like, and that the tongue is literally is represents a like the phallic. Um, my wife actually says sex sells. You put it out. So part of me is like, let me do some video, like really out there, like and put it out and get attention, But the idea of like the tongue is, a lot of words I didn't want to say them, but like dildo, all these words that are literally the tongue is, it
Right.
has its essence. It's like it's there because actually this guy from Harvard I was talking to said actually he was impressed that I was, so to speak, like that I really was on par with a lot of, like I didn't read, I came up with my own, but I was really, really on track with what a lot is being said, has been said. And even there's a guy who talks about semiotics. And so I wrote something similar to so his guy, let's see if I can
Oh,
find
okay.
what he wrote. Pierce, from about 1900s. Pierce, he was a big philosopher, and he talks about the idea of a symbol having its own like icon. So the linguistic term for what I'm talking about is iconicity. Like, so I'm talking about a letter has a power, it's iconicity. And when he's talking about an icon here, I just found this, that in a sense, the icon stands on its own. And I feel like the letters of the alphabet, I don't think he appreciated what he calls phonous themes. Have you heard of phonous themes? Like you have like FLs, a lot of FLs or like flow and or like slip and slide. A lot linguists have noticed pairs in English, but it's not across languages. Like where you do have these patterns where slide and slip, where there's a certain essence. So he calls that, but I think they missed the point for me. Like I feel like when he talks about the idea of like the character has its own interpreted as a sign, even if anyway, he says, let's see, what does he say? He says the icon resembles, imitates the object. The icon has of itself a certain character or aspect, one which the object also has, or supposed to have, which lets the icon be interpreted as a sign, even if the object does not exist. The icon signifies essentially the basis of its ground. Anyway, it's a term he used. Peirce defined the ground as a pure abstraction of a quality. So I feel like the letters independent. I didn't know that he wrote this, but I just felt like they have their own essence. I mean, sometimes they can go against, like, I feel I
Right.
am trying to define what would be an ideal intuitive language. Like, I'm not saying that necessary language is, but I'm saying let's define what could be intuitive. And I say like each letter, I mean, in a word, it's complex because you have several letters, right? So you have some that may go with what I want to say, and some that don't. But I tried. What my idea is that each letter has its own character, and this is exactly. He's not talking about the alphabet letters per se,
Right.
the phones, but you know, each one is its own, has its own personal essence. That's what I talk about. Is essence, like like hey, breath is breath. That's one you can't take it away. That's there. Like, or the L, like, or for me, because of linguistics, I realize NDTL. They're with design too. They're all the same on a certain level. They're all of the same die, so to speak. They're all an extension of the tongue. Actually, even Shen, apparently, did you notice? I noticed actually Shen, is basically you're kind of touching your tooth almost, or
Yeah.
or tooth in English, or dental. So you're all approaching. So I feel like they're all of the same class. So I'm saying the tip of the tongue, no matter if it's a T or an L or N or a D or a Z, they're all of the same. And I really look at them as a group. So I say all of those are kind of the phallic, they represent, something tall. But then there's an aspect also. I look at the word talon, for example, talon. So, talon of a bird. So I feel like some of the letters have more tension. I also have great gradations of tension scales. So sometimes the T just represents like tight. It's just the gripping tension. And then L for me, so there's a scale. And I look at the alphabet as a scale of also the parallels. I feel like the M, which is more softer, is parallel to the L. So I have like these theory where M equals to L, and the T, which is actually I didn't know that, but it turns out it's a plosive, equals a P. So I kind of plug them in, and I say, and I do have a system where like instead of like even like for haki to throw, so you have and a lot of words with P's are like to puke, but I feel like the T sometimes can take the same role. So I have a cross linguistics approach. I mean, where a plosive, a T, like, or lahaki, so you have to vomit. It doesn't, but like a lot of P's, like palat, palat, palit, you could feel a kind of protrusion, like spit. But I feel like the ka, lahaki, the ka, or the ta does the same thing. So I have this theory of plosives, where basically it the essence is the same, even if it's a
I,
different letter.
I think it's good stuff. You may have certain sections that'll be more academically rooted. You may have some that are less. You may have some, as you even said when you wrote to me, some that just say you think you're pushing it, and all that's good. But the Dain and Zion, the Dalit and Zion, of course, the Aramaic, that's a
Sahar
regular,
is what?
right? That's a regular, Dahav and Zahav.
Aha, they were kind of, yeah, he talks about it. But I even found interesting, like Shad. I mean, that's just interesting because I think of Tit and Shad, and from what I've read, the Shad was a Tad. So I feel again, it's again the protrusion. The Tad, the Tit kind of TT is kind of, again, it's not the protrusion again. The idea of Tit or and then when I read the Shad would have been was apparently from what I read just on online sources was a Todd. I find it so interesting. It's the same idea. You could say that they're copying from each other, or you could say it's the essence or tooth.
Hmm.
And in German, it's Zin or something. I don't know what's tooth. Zen, like Shen. You could say
Well, in Yiddish, it's same.
saying. So did it come from the Hebrew, or do you say it's the essence? Like you have tongue. You have tooth, and you have dental. You're touching the tongue. Does it have to be borrowing, or does something about the tooth that's
Just in, yeah,
from
imminent.
itself, from its own expression?
Maybe Moses says things here and there.
Moseson, or
Moses and the guy we just
oh
looked
yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah. But he talks about Hebrew being like okay, that's kind of right. That would be interesting. The
Right,
source of all languages. Yeah, I feel like what I'm saying is more really universal, more like, I'm
right.
saying like, look at universal, breath should be breath, like let's look at universals. and breath should be breath. And then there's ideal just in general, soft versus harsh. Like would hard stuff have more harshness? Like stone, st seems to be a lot of words in English. St, stiff, stone, stress. There's a lot of st's. So that's but
Stark.
stark, yeah. Stutter. Anyway, stutter is a little different. So there's one essence is just harshness. So like as far as making language universal is there's soft essence of softness, like L, like lull, and also tsala. Like for me, the L, like someone who's limping, like L is a
Right.
limping letter versus t versus the tough, So like there's a scale. So language at its very basic, I would argue, and this should be studied eventually, like do words with more tension have more tension in them, and it goes back to mind body, the body's tense, so you create words. Or even the word, I was thinking the word cold, ka, is there a reflection in the body, the coldness that the language is picking up on it? I don't know about hot, I don't know, but like anyway, so it is about fun, really. Ultimately, it's about fun, and it's about the ideal. It's like also defining what's the ideal and what would be intuitive or should be.
Right.
Even if it doesn't fit, like could we establish? And that's kind of what I'm saying. What would be an ideal, or create one in the future? Like what would be something to measure against? What should be, or how within a complex system of sounds, and you only have a limited amount of sounds, how could it work? And part of what I say, it seems like the first letter, it seems to be like not every letter is equal. It just seems also based on observation. Like the first letter often seems to set the tone, or the last. So like touch, for example, and I don't want to go on and on, but like the word touch, you're touching. Or naga, again, you're starting with contact, but it's the first. I feel like the first letter, if you're creating this model of an ideal language.
How do you have touching from touch?
No, like the tongue is touching, but there's an immediate
Oh,
contact. So touching is being mirrored by the tongue. In a sense, I think of the tongue as a finger, as a gesturing device, taking it outside the mouth and saying it's literally a finger.
right.
Or a foot. Like actually, I noticed a lot of words, even walk, lech and walk are almost the same. Think of the lk and the lach. I feel like they're really or regel, and leg. But I feel it goes back to the essence of the tongue. I feel like the tongue is a leg, literally. It's a movable, protruding object that's very nimble. Even think of the word nimble. All these. It's a very agile. It's a very. I don't know. I just feel like it's the essence. The tongue is walking. Is a walking. So anyway, so I do enjoy it deeply. So that's part of it. I love it. And
I hear you.
I do want to put it out,
I
and that's
can
why.
tell.
And I should do these
And,
videos, put it out to the world, and short ones.
or even short little units, and then you'll build up little units into a book, whatever. Do it unit by unit. I don't know. I think it'll be appreciated. I kind of like it myself.
Thank you. Thank you.
So remember Fishbane.
Fishbane. So he was saying, like, forget about that academics, basically, or like, don't worry too much about it. It's about
Well, as he got older, he was looking more for the meaning, and where that goes. And he was also saying he was no longer in the state where he, worried about the academic. He didn't have to, but
right, right. How do you feel about? I mean, I guess it's important, but then we shouldn't be too, like you mentioned the word hyper academic, right? At some point, like this guy who I was talking to for Harvard, I felt like everything I say, he had to look up to see if someone else said it. Like, can't you just think? I said, don't let common sense get in the way of science. I mean, like apparently sometimes actually common sense guides. People have hunches, like up to what the research, but you can't just like cut off your thinking and just say, what did someone else say? Like, can you just
no, I agree. It's sort of related. I was at a Shabbat meal a couple of weeks ago, and there was one guy. He was a little challenging to be around, and uh, and then whatever, I gave a little Dvar Torah, and he said something about, that's not pshat. And then I started thinking,